Greetings again, wrestling fans. Hello to all the new followers. If you find these videos helpful, please do the follow garbage. Here we are with another Observer from 1992. August 3, 1992 Observer Newsletter, Vince Drama in Penthouse, False Stories. Looking back at ZAHORIAN. By Observer Staff. P.O. Box 1228 Campbell, California 950091228. August 3, 1992. The September issue of Penthouse magazine, which hit the newsstands Monday, July 27, Howard Stern cover, has an article on Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. The article, written by Jeff Savage, who broke several of the original stories in the San Diego Union Tribune earlier this year, entitled No Holds Barred, jumps from one sordid tale to another, most, but not all, of which would be known by the majority of Observer readers. The wrestling article is part of a 3-article series entitled Bad Sports Illustrated with a mock SI cover, which includes articles on boxing and baseball. The fact the wrestling story was published was much to the chagrin of Titan Sports and lawyer Jerry McDevitt, who sent letters to the magazine trying to block the article. McDevitt's main arguments were that he claimed Savage's main source for the story had duped him and was a convicted felon, and that Savage had never tried to contact the WWF for comment. Since McDevitt should have had no idea of who the main source was or if there even was a main source, which from the article, it was obvious there were many different sources, that cleared up the first part of his question. The second comment was even funnier, since Savage apparently had phone bill records showing 3 or 4 attempts to contact the WWF and McMahon personally, and that it was the WWF that had never responded to the calls. The article talked about the various subjects and stories that were reported by the national media months back. As last week went on, from a letter McDevitt sent to the New York Times, McDevitt was referring to Lee Cole as the source who supposedly duped Savage and was an ex-con. In attempting to cloud the real issue by trying to obfuscate things and create a personal vendetta illusion with Alex Marvez, who sent out the wire service story about the federal investigation into Titan Sports last week then ran throughout the country, McDevitt wrote, in a letter to the higher-ups at the time, about Lee Cole, saying that he had a signed affidavit saying that Cole had made up his story, threatened physical harm on a WWF employee if they didn't quit the organization, and that he had served time at Rikers Island, a prison in the New York area. So we can deduce he had been referring to Cole when he talked about Savage's main source. There were quotes from both Lee and Tom Cole in the Penthouse story, but the story covered far more ground than anything either of those two said. The main new material was a not at all very nice portrait of Vince McMahon personally, with the main source being Jim Stewart, McMahon's former limo driver, and a detailed description of the alleged encounter between McMahon and former referee Rita Chatterton in 1986, where Chatterton claimed, after she was allegedly raped, that McMahon brought up his ground rules to Chatterton about not having sex with any company employees, and while she cried, he laughed at her and said she had just broken the rule. The 5-page article opens talking about the mysterious death of Nancy Argentino, the 23-year-old traveling companion of Jimmy Snuka, who died back in 1983 in a case that has never been solved. While the story hints of a cover-up, it closes with Whitehall Township Detective Jerry Perconyan, the prime investigator in the death of Argentino, saying that stories of a cover-up are pure unadulterated bullshit. Since it was 1983 and Snuka doesn't even wrestle for the WWF, it really wasn't tied in well to the rest of the story, or explained that at the time Snuka was one of the company's leading drawing cards. Most of the other stories from Tom Cole, Murray Hodgson, Rita Chatterton, Barry Orton, Lord Littlebrook, Billy Jack Haynes, Tom Hankins and Billy Graham were reported here and elsewhere months ago, and have been given various degrees of credence, but the latest breaks in the story, much of which have gone unreported by the national media, weren't in because the deadline for the story was months back. No time frame is given on a lot of the stories, which hurts since Orton's story about Terry Garvin was from 1978 and neither was working in the WWF at the time. Graham's story about the plane ride with Hulk Hogan was from 1982 when both were working in the AWA, and the rest of the stories were all several years old, with only Chatterton's given a 1986 day. New items were tales from Stewart claiming McMahon was apathetic regarding the law and talking about personal vices when it came to drug use and ordering him to break traffic laws. Mike Clark, the former Canadian referee who appeared on Now It Can Be Told, gave a detailed description of what he claimed was an attempted seduction by Terry Garvin and how, upon rebuffing the advance, was never used again by the WWF. Boy, have the phone lines been buzzing over the past week with all these hot scoops, such as Hulk Hogan signing with New Japan, Sting jumping to the WWF, the Steiners jumping to the WWF, Bret Hart jumping to WCW, Ted DiBiase jumping to WCW, Ric Flair jumping to WCW, A trade being worked out for Ric Flair to jump to WCW, and in exchange, Lex Luger would be able to wrestle for the WWF, but WCW nixing the deal. Am I leaving anything out? Oh yeah, Gorgeous George the original passed away last week. Of course, none of these stories are true. To the best of my knowledge, only one of the stories, the one involving Hogan, is even in the process of any negotiations taking place. But Hogan has not signed with New Japan, although New Japan is hopeful of putting a deal together and having him debut at the Tokyo Dome on January 4, 1993. But there is not a chance of him debuting at the September 23 show at the Yokohama Arena. New Japan's show on the date is in direct competition with the WWF, which is sending its top 10 drawing cards to the same building for a card combined with War just a week earlier. As for the rest of the stories, while nothing in this business is impossible, it's pretty hard to have negotiated a deal when no lines of communication have been opened. It's no secret Flair has spoken with Watts, and the two have even negotiated a settlement on the matter of the championship belt. But I dare say McMahon isn't about to start an angle involving Flair on television if he believed there was much of a chance of the guy leaving. It's also no secret that talks have taken place with Jake Roberts. Hart and DiBiase have not even spoken with WCW, let alone agreed to any deal or given notice to the WWF, despite any rumors that have been floating around to the contrary. They've negotiated with WCW in the past, Hart as recently as earlier this year, and Kip Fry had a good shot at pulling the deal off, except Hart's contract wasn't up for several more months, and both talks have been serious at times, but neither has spoken to Bill Watts or discussed a new deal. While DiBiase does have a history working for Watts in the early 1980s, it's hard to believe that both of these wrestlers stayed put when WCW was offering a lot more money, guaranteed, and would make a move when the money going around to the wrestlers seems to be in the process of being cut down. As for Sting, his contract with WCW has more than 2 years left, and while Lex Luger did leave the company on a valid contract, as did Sid Audi, so it's not like it's impossible to do so, Sting has the best guaranteed money deal in the US wrestling scene right now, and unless he's totally miserable with the current environment, he'd be a fool to go. The Steiners' contract expires in December. At that time, I suspect the WWF would make a move for them, and then it may simply comes down to money, and I'm sure if WCW tries to cut their money, they would consider leaving. But I don't expect that to happen, at least as far as their money being cut. As far as where they wind up after December, I wouldn't be sure that they even know. At that time, maybe they'll go, but that's months away. And during the same time period, maybe some WWF contracts will expire and Watts will sign newcomers. The Gorgeous George story that ran around everywhere last week appears to have been a hoax. We've contacted many different names who were on top in the wrestling game as far back as the 30s, and nobody even recalled the wrestler George Arena, although we have had it confirmed that he did wrestle in Canada as Baron Arena in the 50s. The bit about him being the original Gorgeous George was almost certainly a hoax, which stemmed from his own untrue claims he made in a 1984 newspaper article. The fact Arena's death got so much national press as being the death of Gorgeous George before the hoax was discovered, particularly since the death of Gorgeous George 30 years ago was front-page news in many papers around the country, was amazing in and of itself. But even when the hoax was discovered, the wire services, instead of reporting it as a hoax, instead perpetuated the original story, which garnered even more press, by just resending the story and adding deep in the story the graph that the more famous George passed away 30 years ago, but that Arena was the origin. The golden goose that the WWA in Los Angeles seemed to have lucked into with those big gates for recent shows at Cal State Los Angeles for Lucha Libre-style wrestling, suffered a severe flesh wound this past weekend. A tour was set up originally where the AAA Antonio Peña's Mexico City-based promotion, which airs in the U.S. on Galavision and has a large following in certain Hispanic communities, was sending 3 of its biggest draws, El Hijo del Santo, Perro Aguayo and Conan El Barbaro, to California for shows on July 25 and July 26, the latter of which would be at the Hollywood Palladium. In probably the best-kept secret in the history of Bay Area wrestling, the July 25th show was in Watsonville, California, a small town about an hour and a half south of San Francisco. Even with the show not being announced until the last minute, and even with the most hardcore fans in the area not even aware of it, it drew a sellout of around 900 from fans in the small town. Conan was never advertised even locally for the show because by the time Watsonville was secured, the promoters already knew he wasn't coming, as they'd been told he had suffered a heart attack, which, as we later came to find out, wasn't true. However, both Santo and Aguayo no-showed, leaving the show with nothing but no-name Southern California locals, some of whom are very good and actually put on a very good show. The promoters did have posters in front of the building that night making it clear that both big-name Mexicans wouldn't be there, and an announcement was made saying there were problems with their visas and they had gotten as far as Tijuana and couldn't come across the border, which also, apparently, isn't true. although the local promoters probably were not aware of that either. In a display of fairness to customers never before seen in pro wrestling, besides offering refunds, the promoters refunded a large chunk of the gate. Since tickets were priced at $20 and $18, they refunded either $10 or $8. So everything was the equivalent of a $10 ticket to everyone with a stub and went on with the show, which was well received. Things didn't run nearly as smoothly in Hollywood. Hollywood looked to be another mega gate, with the building set up for $2,530 at $30 down $10, so a gate, if the building was filled, the gate would have been in the $50,000 range. Judging from the advance, it appeared the sellout was easy. However, with the signs being posted that Santo Aguayo and Conan wouldn't be there, roughly 1,500 fans asked for refunds, and since these shows are notorious for huge walk-ups, those walking up for the most part left before buying tickets. As it turned out, only 500 to 800 fans were left to see a show composed of only local wrestlers. To make matters worse, the wrestlers were told that they shouldn't cash their paychecks until Tuesday. Because of the problems with getting the AAA wrestlers in, all future dates appear to be on hold, with the August 8th show at CSLA almost surely cancelled. There is talk of it being reset for either August 15th or August 16th, but that is far from a sure thing, and I'd say the August 22nd AAA television taping set for Los Angeles would be almost out the window. While this is not definite because things still need to be worked out, it appears the relationship between AAA and the local Southern California promoters is out, and AAA sources are talking about running Los Angeles shows at the sports arena, with the blessings and help of the WWF instead, although I'm almost certain no plans in that vein have been finalized either. It's been around 13 months since mainstream media publicity started, with the steroid trial of Dr. George ZAHORIAN. The biggest problem has been that there is too much to easily digest and too many stories that have nothing to do with one another, all having been lumped into one bag. The issue that started it was steroids. And both major promotions deserve praise amongst all the deserved criticism, in that it's pretty obvious that use is way down over the past year in both the WWF and WCW. Over the past week, different WWF sources have indicated steroid use is almost non-existent because of the high penalty of being caught in tests that are seemingly difficult to beat. Although 3 different names have been mentioned by many as it being hard to believe they aren't on anything, with one wrestler stating that a certain major star has a free pass on the test. Certainly on a percentage basis we are talking about less than 10%, a figure that probably compares favorably to other sports in which size and power are a criteria. Certainly Titan will deny any favoritism in the tests, although the Penthouse story and talking about drug tests years back detailed McMahon allegedly covering up positive test results in the past. The name that is continually mentioned in this vein, which would probably be the first name most of you would come up with, is noticeably smaller than he was 1 year ago, but still more muscular than one would suspect a clean bodybuilder to be, not to mention a wrestler who is on the road day after it. While one can scoff at Titan steroid testing and the company's honesty in dealing publicly with the various news stories, one fact remains. Usage of steroids within the WWF is way down from this time last year. It's at a lower level than anyone 1 year ago would have thought would have been possible within the organization. So while the company probably deserves no credit at all for its honesty in dealing with the subject, it does deserve credit for its results. Whether 1 or 3 out of 50 or so wrestlers is still on the suit, that is far less than the 90% figure that so many wrestlers were estimating at this point last year, let alone the 50% figure that appeared to be the case as late as January's Royal Rumble, 2 months after the first test and 6 months after the first announcement. Since Dr. Mauro Di Pasquale was brought in to head the Titan drug program in May, there has been at least 1 steroid suspension and at least 1 other wrestler let go, and reportedly several fines, $1,000, for marijuana use. This is, for almost everyone, if not everyone, a fairly strict drug test that has made tremendous strides in either lowering the levels or nearly ridding the business of one of its biggest problems. As has been mentioned to death, the current hiring practices still favor athletes using steroids before their WWF tenure in order to get a job with the organization, so there is still a major degree of hypocrisy to all of this, but laughing at the policy at face value without examination is also unfair. Steroid use in WCW has also declined in recent months, even without testing. A major reason for the decline has been, surprisingly maybe more than anything, lack of availability. The new laws have made it much harder, not impossible, but much harder to get real steroids. In addition, there is fear among the wrestlers that at any time, Bill Watts may institute a surprise steroid test. The wrestlers have been warned it could happen, and whether or not Watts does a test or not, that warning for the present time has had the effect of getting guys off the juice. While I doubt use is as low as the WWF at present time, although it appears to be as low as it has been in NWA/WCW since the steroid phenomenon hit, it is also far less than the WWF's use was at the same time after its first steroid announcement. Since it has been 6 months since Kip Fry's first policy statement, and use is well under the apparent 50% figure of the WWF 6 months after its first announcement. Since the subject of blood in wrestling has become so controversial, the World Health Organization, WHO, came out with several guidelines for sports federations regarding the spreading of the HIV virus. According to WHO, HIV can be spread either from sharing bodily fluids, blood in particular, or through sex, which I guess in some cases constitutes the same thing. HIV can't be spread through sweat or athletic body contact. The chances of it being spread in a situation where one person is bleeding is considered minuscule. In a contest where 2 men are bleeding, WHO recommends to immediately stop the contest and not resume until the bleeding has ceased or the bleeding parties have both been bandaged up. Since many wrestling companies are loaded with double juice matches and nobody has gone to the WHO doctors and told them about the out-of-the-ring lifestyles of certain wrestlers, I get the feeling it's a strong argument against double juice matches. Not strong enough that anyone doing those kind of matches will listen. But if the doctors aren't overreacting, someday we'll all listen. At that point, it'll be way too late. Question of the week. There was a notable decline in responses to what I figured would be a question that everyone would have an answer for, which is, what was the greatest match, in your opinion, of the past 10 years? Only a few matches received more than 3 votes, with the number of responses being far less than that of the previous questions. I'm not sure if it says that readers today are more into political issues than great wrestling matches, or simply that it's hard to limit yourself to picking just one great match. I'm not sure what the lack of response says, although in hindsight everyone has so many memorable matches that it was a mistake to try and limit a pick to just one. I know myself, I'd have a terrible time picking just one match. As far as matches that were so memorable and so important that they literally had huge effects on the promotion at the time, the 2 bouts that come to mind are Flair Von Erich that was on this list and the Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Jumbo Tsuruta match from June 1/90. As a live spectacle, the latter match had crowd emotion like I've never seen before. From what I've seen on tape, the most emotion-packed match I've ever seen was the Funk Brothers vs. Stan Hansen and Terry Gordy on August 31/83. The best match I can recall taking into effect its time period was probably Okada vs. Asuka. My belief is that as the best wrestlers learn and study past great matches, they improve on them, so the standard for great matches increases as time goes on. Although not taking that into effect, I'd say the 51-minute All-Japan 6-man tag match on April 20, 1991 with Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi vs. Tsuruta and Tao and Fuji, and an All-Japan Women's Elimination Tag Team match in November 90 as technical matches being unsurpassed, but those matches seem to lack being memorable because they weren't the individual matches with much build-up that make them memorable in that wood. In 1987, I saw an All-Japan Women's 12-woman tag match that from a live perspective blew away anything I've seen before or since, and I can't even tell you the name of all the participants, so that says something about it. But I've never seen anything approaching heat like that match, and it went 50 minutes with nothing but spot after spot. Actually, the endurance of the crowd was almost as impressive as the endurance of the wrestlers. Of course, the classic Ric Flair matches also come to mind. From a live perspective, the 2 I seem to remember best were a 1987 match in Baltimore against Barry Windham during the Crockett Cup of that year, April 12, 1987, and the 89 match with Steamboat. The 2 best ones I've seen were also Windham and Steamboat, but the Windham match in Fayetteville and the classic 55-minute television match with Steamboat, April 2, 1989 New Orleans. The September 2nd Clash of the Champions from Center Stage will celebrate the 20th anniversary of pro wrestling on CH-17 in Atlanta, which is now TBS, formerly local Atlanta television station WTCG. WTCG went on satellite in the late 1970s, and with the increase in cable systems, it wasn't long before the Saturday Night Wrestling show was the most widely viewed show of any kind on cable television in the United States. While that is no longer the case, nor has it been for several years, practically every long-time wrestling fan has numerous fond memories of pro wrestling on TBS. As part of the celebration, WCW will hopefully bring on and bring back memorable moments from the previous 20 years. So for this week's question, which is really a many-part question, based on your own memories of pro wrestling on the Superstation, and this is something I'm really encouraging longtime fans to respond to more than newer fans for obvious reasons. 1. Name 5 previous wrestling superstars that you believe contributed the most to the growth and success of pro wrestling on TBS that are not presently affiliated with World Championship Wrestling that you would believe should be brought back to make a guest appearance on the show. Keep in mind that since these results will be given to those in power, Whether they'll pay attention is another matter, but my guess is that someone will at least take them into consideration. Please limit picks to wrestlers that could legitimately be brought back without political problems, so don't mention Ric Flair, the Road Warriors or Roddy Piper, as influential as they all may have been. Also, choices don't necessarily have to be limited to wrestlers. I'd say announcers and managers should also be considered if you think they are deserving. 2. Name your 5 most memorable moments from pro wrestling on the Superstation. This could be matches, angles, interviews, whatever. 3. What are the most memorable matches? Pick up to 5 that you have seen on the Superstation. Remember that all matches from Clashes of the Champions are eligible, but no pay-per-view matches are. 4. Pick the single greatest match you've ever seen on the Superstation. Doesn't have to be the most memorable, as they aren't the same thing. 5. Pick the greatest wrestling individual performer of the 1973-92 period for his work on pro wrestling on TBS. 6. Pick the greatest tag team of the 1973-92 period that appeared regularly on the Superstation. 7. Pick the 5 individuals not on this list that you feel were the most important and influential to pro wrestling success on the Superstation over the past 20 years. The list I've got are Gordon Solie, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, Mr. Wrestling 2 and Ole Anderson. Pick 5 others. Promoters, managers, announcers, wrestlers or anyone else is eligible. All Japan. A late addition to the schedule was a show July 24th at the 68,000-seat Itsuma Dome in Itsuma, the largest indoor sports arena in Japan, which just opened. However, without a major lineup and only about 10 days prior announcement of the date, Tao is winning matches he normally wouldn't because of his Triple Crown title match against Stan Hansen on July 29th in Matsudo. Also, Hansen and Johnny Ace beat the Patriot and Barry Horowitz, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura beat Haruka Eigen and Motoshi Okuma in 22:42. Wouldn't you have loved to have seen them go that long? Giant Kimala 2 and Abdullah the Butcher beat Chris and Mark Youngblood, Mighty Inoue pinned Sunny Beach, Richard Slinger and Billy Black beat Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Ryuma Izumida, and the Destroyer beat Masao Inoue with the figure 4. Next tour is August 20th to September 9th with Stan Hansen, first week only Terry Gordy, Steve Williams, Danny Spivey, Doug Furness, Dan Crawford, The Patriot, Tommy Rogers, Bobby Fulton, Jackie Fulton, and Tommy Angel. No word on the Brody Memorial Show on July 21st at Korakuen Hall. We'll have details next week. July 25th in Aranamachi saw Tao and Fuchi and Ogawa beat Kikuchi and Kawada and Misawa in 20:59 when Tao pinned Kikuchi, Hansen and Ace beat Youngbloods, Abdullah and Kimala 2 beat Patriot and Beach, Kobashi pinned Black, Slinger and Horowitz over Izumida, and Mighty Inoue and Baba and Kimura beat Okuma and Iga. July 22nd in Tsushima drew a sellout 1,750 as Kawada and Kobashi and Kikuchi beat Tao and Fuchi and Ogawa in 29:57 when Kawada pinned Fuchi, Hansen and Ace beat Youngbloods, Abdullah and Kimala 2 beat Patriot and Beach, Horowitz and Black beat Slinger, and Mighty Inoue and Baba and Kimura beat Okuma and Iga. July 20th in Fukaya drew a sellout 1,700 as Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Tao and Fuchi and Ogawa in 25:33 when Kobashi pinned Ogawa with the moonsault, Ace and Black beat Patriot and Beach, Kimala 2 and Abdullah beat Youngbloods, Kikuchi pinned Sling, Horowitz pinned Mighty Inoue. Misawa missed a few shows with a blown-out shoulder but was forced back into action before he was ready because the promotion didn't want both top drawing cards, Misawa and Surita, to miss the major house shows. He missed a few small shows but was back for the Dome show. TV on July 19th drew a 5.0 and 4.7 rating. Japanese Wrestling Journal reported that the June 5th Budokan match with Fulton and Rogers vs. Crawford and Furness was a Match of the Year candidate. The match wasn't taped for television. The May/June tour was written up as the most successful tour in the history of the promotion. New Japan. A few matches have been added to the undercard of the NWA tournament. On August 6th in Shizuoka, besides the tournament matches of Scott Norton vs. Bam Bam Bigelow, Keiji Muto vs. Barry Windham, Arnold Anderson vs. Steve Austin, and Masa Chono vs. Tony Halme, they'll also have Riki Choshu and Kensuke Sasaki vs. Rick Rude and the Barbarian, Super Strong Machine vs. Terry Taylor, and Jushin Liger and Tatsumi Fujinami vs. Pegasus Kid, Chris Benoit and Jim Neidhart. August 7th in Nagoya, besides Rude vs. Machine, Hiroshi Hazi vs. Taylor, Sasaki vs. Neidhart and Shinya Hashimoto vs. Barbarian also has Wyndham and Norton vs. Muto and Fujinami and Choshu, and Masa Saito vs. Bigelow and Halme. July 24th in Moronan drew 2,370 as Muto and Hashimoto and Fujinami beat TNT and Halme and Bigelow when Muto pinned TNT with the moonsault. Choshu and Sasaki beat the Untouchables from Windy City Wrestling, Chono and Iizuka beat Hiro Saito and Machine. Norton and Masanobu Kurisu beat Kengo Kimura and Osamu Kido, Liger and Hazi beat Tatsutoshi Goto and Norio Oniga, Samurai pinned Hiroyoshi Yamamoto, Black Cat pinned Osamu Nishimura and Koji Kanemoto pinned Satoshi Kojima. July 23 in Hakodate drew a sellout 3,960 as Muto and Choshu and Masasaito beat Armstrong and Norton and Bigelow and Muto pinned Armstrong with a Frankensteiner. Fujinami and Hashimoto over Untouchables, Halmei and TNT beat Hazi and Chon. Liger and Sasaki and Iizuka beat Oniga and Goto and Machine, Hiro Saito pinned Kanemoto and Samurai pinned Nishimura. Neither Joan nor Marvis Frazier have heard anything of late in regards to the September 23 date in Yokohama against Fujinami, so that match is obviously far from a done deal. July 22 in Aomori drew a sellout 3,350 as Hashimoto and Chono and Muto over TNT and Norton and Halmei, Choshu and Fujinami beat Goto and Machine, Armstrong and Bigelow beat Kimura and Masasaito, Samurai and Sasaki beat Kido and Hazi, Oniga and Hiro Saito over Liger and Kantaro Hoshino and Untouchables beat Kojima and Izuku. New Japan Television this past Saturday drew a 6.1 and 5.7 rating. Other Japan notes. Local TBS, not to be confused with TBS in the US, aired a 2-hour primetime special on the phenomenon of Atsushi Onita on 9 to 11 p.m. on July 28. Rings on July 16 in Osaka drew a sellout 3,850 fans, with the main bouts having Willie Peters DDQ Mitsuya Nagai in a weird finish when Nagai made 5 rope escapes, which automatically ends the match, but Peters had received at the same point 2 yellow cards, which equals disqualification. Similar to soccer rules, Dirk Leon Frey knocked out Hans Niemann, Chris Stillman beat Ramaji Bozoriashi Bili submit in 5:14, Masaki Sadake knocked out Peter Eel, Andrei Kapilov made Fulcon submit, and Akira Maeda beat Willie Williams in the loser must retire match by a third-round submission. The Fuji Network voting for the 7 teams, 14 wrestlers, and the Fans Decide Tag Team Tournament saw teams picked being Asia Kong and Bull Nakano, Seiki Hasegawa and Mariko Yoshida, Akira Hokuto, and Tashio Yamada, Kyoko Inoue and Terry Power, Mima Shimoda, and Manami Toyota, Tsuko Mita and Takako Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe and Bat Yoshinobu. The tournament starts July 30 in Mito with Toyota and Shimoda versus Watanabe and Yoshinaga, and Yoshida and Hasegawa versus Mita and Takako Inoue. August 9 in Nagoya has the 2 winners on July 30 meeting, plus Power and Kyoko Inoue versus Hokuto and Yamada. The 2 winners in Nagoya wrestle on August 13 at Ogaki, and the championship match has the Ogaki winner against top seed Kong and Kimura on August 15 at Tokyo Korakuen Hall. Biggest All-Japan Women's show of the past week was July 25 in Yokkaichi as Toyota and Yamada and Kyoko Inoue beat Kong and Hasegawa and Kwaro Ito, Yoshida pinned Miori Kamiya, Takako Inoue pinned Cynthia Moreno, and Nakano and Watanabe and Yoshinaga beat Hokuto and Mita and Shimoda. July 24 in Matsudo drew 1,650 as Yamada and Toyota beat Hasegawa and Kyoko Inoue and Kong pinned Mita. War announced that the Road Warriors wouldn't be coming in for the August 13 Korakuen Hall show, but would be in for a week in September along with Paul Diamond, Kato and WWF. The August 13 show will have Genichiro Tenryu and Masao Orihara versus Kabuki and Tatsumi Kitahara, Ashura Hara versus Takashi Ishikawa, and prelims. With so many shows that week in Tokyo, that may be a hard sellout. The WCW Great American Bash received more publicity in Japanese magazines than any pay-per-view in history. Weekly Gong gave it 7 pages, while Weekly Pro devoted 5 pages to the show this past week. Reason, of course, is that Williams, Gordy and Vader are all over huge in Japan, plus they had to cover Hazi, Hashimoto and Liger's matches in depth as well. They did an angle in Portland, Oregon at Sandy Barr's gym where the Bruise brothers, Ron and Don Harris, attacked Ryumago with a broom and other objects and smashed his head into a lot pull-down machine to set up the first Oriental Pro Wrestling Tour, which started July 26. Most of the main events have Go and Jesse Barr versus Bruise brothers. FMW on July 24 in Fukui drew 2,108 as Sama Asako and Onita beat Horace Boulder, and the Gladiator in 9:59, and after the match Sabu attacked Onita, who bled from a gimmick, Tiger Jeet Singh and Big Titan over Mr. Ganasuk and Tarzan Goat. The Sheik pinned Great Punk in 2:15 and Sabu pinned A.G. Ezuki. On FMW's July 21 show, Singh attacked a Tokyo sports reporter, work, and he juiced, and they showed photos of him in the hospital getting treatment. Weighing on July 24 in Osaka drew 2,223 as Leatherface and Mr. Pogo beat Jason the Terrible and Mitsutaru Tokuda in a bunkhouse match when Leatherface hit Jason over the head with a chainsaw. Mitsuhiro Matsunaga won a battle royal and also pinned Eric Ember. Kevin Sullivan beat Masked Inferno, Yukihide Kanemura beat Samoan Warrior via DQ and Lucifer, Steve Collins pinned Ryo Miyake. Matsunaga's win over Embry set up the finals of the tournament to determine the opponent on August 2 for Pogo in a ring surrounded by fire match. In this match, on July 25 in Nagoya before a sellout 1,500 in a small gym, Matsunaga beat Sullivan. Matsunaga bled buckets and after the match, half the world attacked Matsunaga and Lucifer threw fire at both Matsunaga and ref Wally Yamaguchi. LLPW debuts on August 29 in Korakuen Hall with Shinobu Kondori vs Rumi Kazama and Harley Saito and Norio Tatno vs Miki Handa and Hasaki plus Eagle Sawai on the show. July 25 in Takaoka saw Titan and Gladiator and Boulder beat Onita and Asako and Fuji in a street fight. Goto and Punk beat Sheik and Sabu and Singh pinned Gyanasuk in 159. JWP ran a show as part of a major festival on July 25 in Nagoya, which was a free show with Devil Masami and Commando Boishoi over Cutie Suzuki and Sumiko Saito on top, plus Mayumi Ozaki pinned Hikari Fukuoka and Dynamite Kansai pinned Plum Mariko. July 23 in Niigata drew a sellout 3,850 as Boulder and Sabu, the king of barbed wire matches, and Gladiator won a no-rope barbed wire match from Onita and Asako and Ganasuk when the barefoot Sabu did a moonsault standing on top of the barbed wire to pin Ganasuk, and after the match Sheik ran in and attacked Onita. Goto DDQ Sheik when Sabu and Fuji interfered and Singh and Titan beat Punk and Fuji. July 22 in Yamato drew a sellout 2,304 as Gladiator and Titan beat Onita and Asako in a street fight. Sheik and Singh beat Fuji and Goto in 15 in Sheik and Singh's first time as a tag team, and Sabu pinned Punk. July 20th at the Omiya Skate Center drew a sellout 3,478 as Onita and Asako and Ganasuk beat Boulder and Gladiator and Titan in a street fight. Sheik and Sabu beat Goto and Fuji and Singh pinned Punk in 44. After the show was over in an angle, Onita, Goto and Punk stormed the heel dressing room and attacked Singh and left him bloody in a new twist. Wing drew a sellout 3,169 in Isazaki, which is Mr. Pogo's hometown, as Pogo and Samoan beat Jason and Tokuda when Pogo used a baseball bat in barbed wire and chain on Tokuda. Matsunaga pinned Lucifer, Embry pinned Inferno, Sullivan pinned Shimada, and Leatherface pinned Miyake. Japan Television Rundown. July 5 All Japan. 1. Patriot and Black beat Mighty Inoue and Ogawa. Korakuen must have been about 100 degrees because the fans were all waving fans in front of their face and not reacting to the match. Black's body looks bad, but he's a good worker. Patriot looks more juiced than almost anyone in the business today. He pinned Inoue with the Patriot missile. 2 stars. 2. Baba and Tao beat Kimala 2 and Abdullah. 2 has gotten so fat. Even heavier than Abdullah. He's moving a lot slower, but it's still funny to see a guy 430 or so and so fat around the middle move the way he can. Tao looks so out of place in this freak show, and it doesn't work putting him with these guys because he lacks charisma but does well with hot workers. Tao slammed 2 off the top rope, gave him a DDT and a golden arm bomber. Dud. 3. Misawa and Kawada and Kobashi beat Hansen and Horowitz and Ace in 1750. Horowitz showed good skill but didn't do anything special. Just an ordinary match. Nobody looked bad, but the Japanese weren't anywhere close to their usual standards here. 2 3/4 stars. July 12 All Japan. 1. Kobashi and Kikuchi retained the Asian Tag Team titles, beating Fuchi and Ogawa in a match that lasted just over 30 minutes. This was one of the best matches I've ever seen. The psychology and ring work by all 4 was just incredible. Kobashi and Kikuchi sold as good as anyone ever has. Fuchi's timing and psychology is something that is incredibly underrated. So many near falls that looked like the finish. So many twists and turns. The place went crazy as Kobashi and Kikuchi kept kicking out of sure pins, and it looked for sure like the belts were going to change hands. Finally, Kikuchi pinned Fuchi after reversing a rolling reverse cradle. This was even better than Kobashi and Kikuchi's match with Crawford and Furnace, so it may have been the best tag match of the year. 5 stars. 2. Hansen and Black beat Tao and Kimura. This was supposed to have hot spots when Hansen and Tao, since they've got the title match coming up. Hansen destroyed Tao with a chair at one point. Hansen pinned Kimura, who looked really bad in this environment, with a lariat. After the match, Tao ran Hansen off. 1 1/2 star. 3. Misawa and Kawada beat Slinger and Patriot. Funny to see Slinger in a tag team main event on a TV taping. He's been in some 6-mans, but that's only because he's teamed with Williams and Gordy. Both Patriot and Slinger are 2 of the most improved wrestlers in the business, and they worked a much better bout than it sounded on paper. Kawada pinned Slinger with a brainbuster after lots of near falls. 3 1/2 stars.
USWA.
All three titles changed hands on July 20th in Memphis before 1,800 fans. First off, the Hornet Ron Oakes beat Mike Samples via DQ, Billy Travis and cousin Bertha Travis, Dutch Mantell beat Mike Miller and Lauren Davenport. The Fabulous Fargos, Jackie Jr. and Don Jr., Pat Rose and Tommy Siebold, beat Tony Falk and Tony Williams. Brian Christopher regained the Southern title from Tom Pritchard when Christopher put an object on the toe of his boot and kicked Pritchard, which, ironically, is the same heel move Pritchard used to use. Christopher had put up his girlfriend's car against the title. Jeff Jarrett and Jerry Lawler regained the USWA Tag Team belts against the Moondogs, Cujo aka Lanny Keene and Spot aka Larry Booker, in a match with Jarrett's hair against the belts. Finish saw Jarrett give Cujo a low blow and attempt a sunset flip, but Cujo tried to hang on the ropes and ref Frank Morrell kicked his hands off the ropes. Main event saw Eddie Gilbert regain the USWA title from Ricky Morton when Doug Gilbert interfered and hit Morton with a cowboy boot. On television Saturday, Richard Lee demanded they show a tape of the tag team title change so he could show how Frank Morrell cheated his team out of the belts. They warned Lee that the tape was screwed up and they aired the tape, but right before the finish was to air, the tape broke. Lee got even madder and he yelled to the back and wanted any wrestler who could do a sunset flip to come out. Jobber Bill Rush came out and Cujo came out and they did all the spots leading to the finish, with Lee calling them an ending when Rush gave Cujo a sunset flip. Lee kicked Cujo hands off and counted the pin. Cujo then got mad and chased Rush out because he'd been pinned. They aired several circa 1984 videos of the Rock and Roll Express since Robert Gibson returned Monday night, and the fans gave it a good reaction. Morton had a television match against Miller, ending with Morton winning via DQ when Lauren Davenport interfered, but Miss Texas returned and made the save. Christopher is making Pritchard put up his 1988 Cougar for a title shot this week, and Christopher said a Cougar is just as bad as a Pinto. Christopher said that if he won, he was going to smash up Pritchard's car. The Fargos were brought out, but this week Jackie Jr. was Pat Rose and Don Jr. was the other guy, Siebold, which is the opposite of the previous week. The two didn't get over at all, even in a TV match against Lawler and Jarrett, which ended when Moondogs attacked Lawler and Jarrett for the DQ and they brawled until the televised Oin show ended. July 27th in Memphis had Falk vs. Samples, Hornet vs. Tony Anthony. Smoky Mountain is off for a few weeks, so some of its wrestlers are in this week. Davenport and Miller vs. Texas and Travis. Fargos vs. Mantell and Robert Fuller. Richard Lee vs. Frank Morrell. Christopher vs. Pritchard with the Southern Belt vs. Carr. Rock and Roll Express vs. Doug and Eddie Gilbert. Lawler and Jarrett vs. Moondogs with Lee's hair at stake and Robert Fuller handcuffed to Lee for the belts. Expect Fuller to turn heel and help Moondogs regain the belts. And a 24-man battle royal. Texas. July 24th at the Dallas Sportatorium saw the largest crowd in months of 1,250, but just 102 paid, due to an enormous giveaway at a local car dealership. However, there were only 55 fans left in the building by 12:15 a.m. when the final match of the 13-match show began. Complete Results saw Alex Porto beat Terry Sims in an I Quit match when Sean Summers snuck up from behind Sims and yelled I quit, and the ref assumed it was Sims and ended the match. Manny Villalobos beat Maniac Mike when Mike simply left the ring and was counted out. Summers pinned Brian Kia, formerly Brian Henning. Rod Price beat Scott Putski via DQ when Price's manager Gary Hart put a foreign object into Putski's trunks and the ref saw it and DQ'd Putski. Gary Young and Manny Fernandez beat Ebony Experience when Fernandez hit Booker T with a gimmick. John Tatum pinned the returning Skip Young when Gary Hart hit him with a loaded towel. Rattlesnake Jeff Rates pinned King. Sims pinned Jimmy James. Price beat Sam Houston via DQ when Hart shot the ref with a stun gun, I'm serious, and gave it to Price, who used it on Houston. Hart then took the batteries out of the gun and put it in Houston's hand. The ref saw Houston with the gun and DQ'd him. Houston got mad and tried to shoot Hart, but with no batteries, Hart just walked away. I can't believe I just typed that. Fernandez destroyed Villalobos with all kinds of gimmicks after pinning him. Ebony Experience beat Maniac Mike and Jimmy James via countout when Mike simply walked out again. Putski beat Johnny Mantell via countout and Summers beat Chaz Taylor via DQ when Chaz attacked Steve Dane at ringside, who was eating muffins that a fan had brought for Chaz. The new money men for Global are Wayne Whitford and Greg Pearson, who gained a lot of favor when informing the guys that from this point forward that the babyface wrestlers, who go to the lobby and get $5 for photos taken with fans, would have to fork over $1 of each $5 to the promotion. Ivan Putski was at ringside during his son's match and will be back next week. Tony Adams wasn't back. They began a new storyline with Villalobos claiming he's broke and his family is destitute. A local car dealer showed up Friday and out of the goodness of his heart gave Villalobos a new Ford and he turned on the tears, he was so happy. They announced a bungee cord match on August 15th for Chaz Taylor versus Stephen Dane, although Dane doesn't want to sign an injury waiver so the match is in jeopardy. August 1st at the Sportatorium has Putski versus Mantell for the North American title. Dane and Young defend the tag belts against Evany Experience. Sims versus Porto for the GWF Light Heavyweight title. Fernandez versus Steve Cox. Black Bart versus Midnight Rider. Sam Houston. Gary Young versus Manny Villalobos plus an appearance by the most famous wrestler in Japan, Mr. Sakurada, Kendo Nagasaki. The shows from this point forward will start at 7 p.m. to make sure they don't run until after midnight, and it's 50-cent beer night. Sam Houston's suspension was lifted but he was informed he couldn't hold a title belt for a one-year period, which is why he's coming back as the Midnight Rider instead. I wonder who came up with that unique gimmick. Big D Pro Wrestling on July 26th at the Rocket Palace drew 192 as Texas Doll. Ricky Long beat Chris Banks via countout when Chris Love interfered. Jimmy James pinned Carl Colt. Big D and Eric Fontaine beat Ray Evans and Prince Kaloha. Blackbirds, King Parsons and Action Jacks beat Scott Braddock and The Natural. Price beat Fernandez via DQ and the ref caught Fernandez using a chair and he continued to pound on Price for 5 minutes until Jackson made the save and Sean Stevens kept his Big D title pinning Tatum with Price in Tatum's corner to counteract Freddie Farg. As the ref was involved with Fargo and Price arguing, Stevens pulled out a chain to win. August 3rd is an MS benefit with Stevens versus Hurricane Mike for the title, Tatum and Price versus Blackbirds, Fernandez versus Braddock in a lumberjack match and more. Here and there. Major shakeups on the CH69 wrestling block out of Atlanta. Joe Pedicino and Boney Blackstone, who have hosted the show for many years, were given word this past Thursday that their wraparounds are history. For now, the television shows will continue but with falling ratings. Don't expect 7 hours of wrestling to be retained come September. Lots of stations cutting back on wrestling in September because television ratings by and large have nosedives over the past 6 months across the board. In the San Francisco area, KTVU Channel 2 is dumping 2 of its 3 hours, so expect Wrestling Challenge and WCW Worldwide to be gone and Superstars to be the show to remain. The Atlanta block was no exception, with ratings cut in half over the past 7 months. Pedicino and Blackstone will continue to do television for the local North Georgia wrestling along with Scott Hudson. The final episode of them hosting the block aired this past Saturday with all sorts of kayfabe references at the end. WWA on July 25th in Watsonville, California before Sellout 900 with no-show Santo and Aguayo saw Mixteco beat Raya de Plata 2 stars. King Kona beat Arandu 1 1/2 star. Chamaco Rebelde and Chacal Rivera beat Superboy and Metallico via DQ 3 1/4 stars. Cosmos and Capitan Oro over Scarface and Morella del Ring 3 stars and Piloto Suicida and Mercurio and Scorpio Blanco Superboy under a new mask. Over Loverboy and Crazy Boy and Estampa Brava 3 1/2 stars. A new promotion in Florida called North American Wrestling Federation debuted on July 22nd with Mr. Terrific, Tim Parker, and Big Till DDQ Lou Perez and Mark Starr and Superstar, Bob Cook under a hood, versus Cliff Anderson, as the double headliner at a Tampa flea market before a poor crowd. They'll be wrestling in the same place every other Wednesday for a while. Gordon Scozzari has officially folded his AWF. Win on July 19th at the Baltimore Original Sports Bar saw the semifinals of the Win Championship Tournament as AC Golden beat duelist Jay Witherspoon and Max Thrasher beat AJ Fritzoid, subbing for no-show Neil Superior. Main event saw Cream Team Dave Casanova and Rip Sawyer, DDQ Beauty and the Beast, Adrian Hall and Morgus the Maniac. A rematch between the two teams headlines the August 16th show plus Golden versus Thrasher to crown the first singles champion. Attention roller derby fans. Sports Channel America is going to air old derby tapes from 1977-85 from Northern California as counter-programming on cable on Monday nights to primetime wrestling starting this coming Monday night from 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern and Central. It'll go head-to-head everywhere except in California where it'll air 4 to 6 p.m. It'll also be replayed on Saturday mornings. No doubt they'll attempt to parlay this stuff into gaining interest to start it up again, but as wrestling promoters have learned, Sports Channel is hardly a strong enough vehicle to gain interest in anything. Portland Wrestling on July 25th at the Sports Arena had a skeleton crew with most of the guys in Japan, so main event saw Bart Sawyer beat Mike Starr, Mark Valois, Brickhouse Brown DDQ John Rambo, Buddy Wayne, who is the best worker of the current crew, pinned Al Madril, Jim Pope pinned Damian Knight and C.W. Bergstrom pinned Dirty White, Bobby Blair. The TV still doesn't air on broadcast TV in Portland. They announced they are going to establish World Heavyweight and World Tag Team Champions that will be defended in the US, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Korea, and Japan. Yeah. Tag tourney coming soon. August 1st has a battle royal and Sawyer and Wayne vs. Starr and Madrill. Henry Hubbard ran a show on July 25th in St. Louis with Paul Orndorff pinning Junkyard Dog in the main event. Kevin Von Erich beat Butch Reed via DQ when Orndorff interfered. Ken Wayne pinned Executioner and Ron Powers pinned Don Bass. Next show is August 31st with Von Erich vs. Orndorff, Warlord vs. King Parsons, Reed vs. Powers and Honky Tonk Man vs. Brian Blair. Kerry Von Erich is asking for $700, hotel and transportation for independent dates. McHugh on July 25th in Martinsburg, West Virginia had Jimmy Giannetti, Rust the Voodoo Man, Max Thrasher underneath and Super Destroyers beat Cream Team on top. July 26th in Larry's, Puerto Rico saw Cyclone Salvadorino over Greg Robertson, Mohammed Hussein pinned Rockin' Rebel, Rex King pinned Doug Masters, Black Bart beat El Bronco #1, Steve Dahl pinned Randy Rhodes, Louisiana Lay and Miguelito Perez and Carlitos Colon over Dick Murdoch and Invader #1 and Vigilante #1. July 25th in Kaya, Puerto Rico saw Rhodes pin Rebel, Bart pin Bronco Salvadorino over Robertson, Hussein beat Ricky Santana and a loser leaves town match, Colon and Perez Murdoch and Invader Louisiana Lay beat Vigilante via DQ and Dahl and King beat Masters and Ron Starr to keep the WWC Tag Team title. Dennis Corluzzo has a show August 28th in Clementon, New Jersey with Bob Orton, Chris Candido, Joe Daniels vs. Spider for WWA title, Jimmy Backlund and Mark Starr. August 29th is Rumble 3 in Williamstown, New Jersey, which is the same weekend as the Arezzi convention for those coming from out of town with Jerry Lawler vs. Eddie Gilbert, Backlund vs. Spider, Daniels vs. Orton. Corluzzo, Ed Zone, WIN, and MUF are working together for a benefit show for wrestler Bobby Knight, whose daughter recently passed away and he's been inundated with hospital bills on August 8th in Glen Burnie, Maryland. For ticket info, call 609-848-5499. Shotgun and Rowdy Yates, two sons of former AWA jobber Ken Yates, worked a tag match on July 11th in St. Paul against Buxom Hof and Ray Stevens. Southeastern Championship Wrestling ran a parking lot show on July 19th in Marietta, Georgia before 90 fans with Ray Lloyd and Bambi over Lady X, Peggy Lee Leather, and Ken Timms on top. The Italian Stallion broke his old world record by eating 1 pound of spaghetti in 23 seconds last month in the Spaghetti Eating Championships. That's at least as serious as the WWF vs. WBF tug of war, isn't it? Jim and Rick Lancaster will be having their final match on August 9th in their hometown of Jackson Center, Ohio against Johnny Paradise and White Lightning. Jim Lancaster is a former newsletter correspondent who worked as a local wrestler and jobber for larger promotions for the past 20 years. Working for Canadian Championship Wrestling in Nova Scotia are Goldie Rogers, Bad Boy Eddie Watts, Todd McPhee, Rick Patterson, Canadian Tag Team Champs Leo Burke and Steve Pettypaws. The Butcher Vachon working here is believed to be a relative, nephew, of the original Butcher Vachon. Ike on July 23rd in Tampa saw Coconut Man over El Bandito, Denny Brown beat Mad Bill Dane, Frankie Lancaster beat Cuban Assassin, David Sierra. And after the match Stormtrooper attacked Lancaster, Lou Perez beat Mark Starr via DQ and Raul Mata and Luis Vista beat Terminato, Mark Laurinaitis and Al Green via DQ. Jimmy Backlund worked as the ring announcer and Cuban Assassin gave him a piledriver before one of the matches and beat on him with a second piledriver on the floor until Dean Malenko made the save. Sets up July 30th with Perez and Backlund and Malenko vs. Kendall Windham and Kevin Sullivan. Think he'll no-show as his Japan tour doesn't end until August 2nd, and Starr. Larry Sharp's first Florida shows as a promoter are September 19th and October 17th at the Hillsborough County Community College, Tampa area. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling on July 25th in Stapleton, Georgia saw Colt Steele over Ebony Austin. The Ringlords beat Johnny Blitz and Chaz Rocco. I know he was using the name first, but doesn't that name sound like what it would be if Tug Taylor had a son who was a puppet? Bambi beat Peggy Lee Leather, Rocco won a battle royal and Tommy Rich beat Shaska Watley. July 24th in Bennettsville, South Carolina saw Ringlords regain the SAP Tag Team titles beating Rocco and Rob Van Dam plus Wahoo McDaniel pinned Watley. Rocco and Van Dam had won the belts July 23rd in Lake City, South Carolina beating Ringlords. WWF. Kind of surprising to see the WWF acknowledge the tag team title change on television over the weekend and also acknowledge Bret Hart and Davey Boy Smith as brothers-in-law. Don't know if the title change is part of a new policy in regard to title changes at tapings or simply that the tag match won't air in syndication so it's easier to acknowledge right away. Speaking of Smith, he blew out his knee at the tapings and isn't expected back in action until SummerSlam. Hawk is also out of action with a shoulder injury while Berserker missed this past weekend because his wife was in labor and Sergeant Slaughter missed the past week because of a legit family illness. At the July 21st tapings, they do another confrontation as Ultimate Warrior does an interview. Ric Flair comes out, challenges him if he wins, and after, Warrior says he'll do anything to win the title. Coquina was there as a third member of the Samoan team managed by FA. Rick Martel taunted Shawn Michaels during all of his matches. JW Storm, Jeff Warner, debuted managed by Jimmy Hart. They held a ladder match with the IC belt on the top with Bret Hart against Michaels. Michaels was about to grab the belt when Hart knocked over the ladder. Michaels took a bump off the ladder and Hart got the belt and won. Relampago Conan El Barbaro beat Luis Mendieta Rambo in a lucha-style match which again won't air, although Mendieta used a different ring name. In other matches, Big Boss Man beat Nails via DQ, High Energy and Natural Disasters over Beverly Brothers and Money Incorporated. High Energy and Tito Santana beat Repo Man and Nasty Boys via DQ. Randy Savage and Undertaker beat Flair and Berserker when Undertaker pinned Berserker using the trunks and Savage did some subtle heel antics and Warrior pinned Papa Shango. Correction from 2 weeks back regarding real names. Harvey Wippleman's real name is Bruno Lauer, not David Lauer. WWF had sent out some publicity for an athletic commission listing the latter, even though everyone knows Bruno Lauer has been a wrestling fan for the past 15 years and used that name well before he ever broke into the wrestling business. July 23rd in Las Vegas drew 3,500 as Santana pinned Brooklyn Brawler 1/2 of 1 star. Legion of Doom Animal pinned Repo Man 3/4 of a star. Bushwhackers beat Beverly Brothers dud. Kimala pinned Jim Powers dud. Warrior pinned Shango dud. Mountie beat Slaughter via DQ 1/4 of 1 star. Nasty Boys beat High Energy 1/2 of 1 star. 17 minutes of nothing but stalling, and Bret Hart pinned Michaels 2 stars. July 24th in Phoenix drew 6,300 as Santana pinned Mountie 1/2 of 1 star. Nasty Boys beat High Energy 2.5 stars. Animal pinned Repo Man 1.5 star. Warrior pinned Shango 2 stars. Kimala pinned Powers 1 star. Bushwhackers over Beverly Brothers 2.5 stars and Bret Hart pinned Michaels 2.75 stars. For those of you who saw the interview where Davey Boy Smith talked about SummerSlam with Bret Hart and he said may the best man win, wasn't the immediate thought that there ain't no way, since it seems a lock that the best man isn't winning. In an effort to boost ratings for body stars, they've put a tug-of-war with a few heel wrestlers against bodybuilders this coming Saturday. Notable by his absence from the bodybuilding team was Gary Stridham, who officially is still with the WBF. Primetime Wrestling continues to do well against the summer reruns, doing a 2.8 on July 20th, while All American on July 19th did a 2.0 and Body Stars on July 18th did an 0.5. On the localized interviews that played in this market, the tape dubbing system must have almost worn out, because while Papa Shango's video is on doing his interview, you hear Jimmy Hart and Mountie doing an interview in the background, which with Hart's voice is so loud that it completely distracted you from Shango's interview. Actually, that's not bad for entertainment, but it's bad production. July 24th in Auburn Hills, Michigan drew 3,300 as Virgil pinned Kato 1 star. Natural Disasters beat Money Incorporated via DQ with the new finish of DiBiase hitting Earthquake with the megaphone 3/4 of a star. Crush made Skinner submit dud. Tatanks pinned Rick Martel in 16:45 -2 star. Undertaker pinned DiBiase in 6:32 stars and afterwards he left DiBiase. Jimmy Hart and Fuji all laying after Tombstone piledrivers. Bossman beat Nails via DQ 1.75 stars. Bossman took great bumps carrying things. And Savage pinned Flair in 2053 with a small package 2.75 stars. Add John Tolos to the list of ex-employees not suing the WWF. The latest and final issue of the WWF magazine has a story on Lex Luger where it said he was a former world heavyweight champion. How did that one get past the proofreaders? And also that he got interested in being a wrestler after watching WrestleMania 3 at the Silverdome. Nice story, since Luger had been wrestling for nearly 2 years at the time. July 25th in Denver drew 3,700 as Santana pinned Brawler -1 star. Crush beat Skinner dud. Razor Ramon pinned Powers dud. Nobody cared about Ramon even with all the TV exposure, but he's getting the super push on upcoming shows. Michaels pinned Tatanka 3.25 stars. Undertaker beat Kimala and Fuji in 252 -5 stars. Jim Duggan pinned Mountie dud. Disasters beat Money Incorporated via DQ 1 star. And Savage pinned Flair in 2021 3.75 stars. Word has it that Bill Alfonso jumped to WWF as part of the package with El Gigante. Alfonso was Gigante's roadmate with WCW in helping him cope with foreign surroundings and translating for him, etc. July 26th in Orlando, Florida drew 4,200 as Jim Brunzell pinned Brawler 1/4 of 1 star. Virgil pinned Mountie 1 star. Undertaker beat Kimala and Fuji 1/2 of 1 star. Disasters beat Money Incorporated via DQ 2 stars, Crush beat Skinner -2 stars. Bossman beat Nails via DQ 2.5 stars and Savage pinned Flair in 26 minutes 3 stars. For the September house shows, the top programmed matches will be Savage vs. Ramon and Warrior vs. Kimala as the 2 headline matches. The top secondary programs are Undertaker vs. Flair, Bret Hart vs. Shango, Bossman vs. Nails and Bulldog vs. Repo Man. Well, there's always winter. AAA television taping July 17 in Torreon drew a sellout of what appeared to be around 9,000 fans for a hot show as Rey Mysterio Jr., real name Oscar Gutierrez, apparently some kind of legit relative like a nephew of the original Rey Mysterio. Remember this guy, and even though he's small, he's really a great wrestler to watch, and super cool, loads of charisma and Pantrita del Ring, a wrestling legend from Monterrey who looked good in his AAA debut, beat the Rose and El Indomito in Psychosis, but wears a Jushin Liger outfit and is a tremendous worker. Via DQ and Indomito handcuffed Pantrita's hands together, and to the ropes and just destroyed him 3.5 star. In a battle of heel midgets. Jurito Estrada and Parquita and Picudito double countout Piratita Morgan and Espectrito Jr. and Pequeno Cobarde 2.5 stars. Misterioso and Volador and Angel Azteca beat La Parca and Chacho Herides and Rambo 4.25 stars. Didn't see this, but it was said to have been the best AAA match since the group has gotten on television, and Pero Aguayo and Conan El Barbaro and Mascara Sagrada beat Angel Blanco Jr. and Jerry Estrada and Universo 2000 when Sagrada pinned 2000 to set up a match for 2000's Mexican light heavyweight title 2-star. The title match was July 24 in Aguascalientes, and it ended when El Cicotalico, the middle brother, and the one who didn't get any of the wrestling ability of the Mil Mascaras and Dos Caras family, seconded Sagrada and turned heel on him in slow motion, which made the turn look terrible. Octagon had a Mexican middleweight title defense against Blue Panther on July 24 in Leon. They announced a big show on August 14 in Acapulco where they'll debut a mixed tag match with 2 regular-sized guys teaming with a midget on each side. A regular magazine article claimed that Pero Aguayo has earned more money than any dog in entertainment, surpassing both Rin Tin Tin and Benji. EMLL. Apparently the gate for the Pirata Morgan vs. Canadian Vampire Casanova hair vs. hair match on July 17 at Arena Mexico was $144,000. Yumiko Hara and Suzuka Minami debuted on July 18 in Mexico City teaming with Koro Maeda, losing via DQ to Lola Gonzalez and Xochitl Hamada and La Sirenita. July 24 at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw Arcangel de la Muerte and Guerrero de la Muerte and Cadaver de Ultra Tumba over Ciclone Ramirez and Solar 2 and Talisman Jr. 2.75 stars. Oro and Plata and Bronce beat the Cavemen and Straight Falls with the second via DQ 2.75 stars, all for Metallicos. Ringo Mendoza and Cacho Mendoza and Mascara Magica Eddie Guerrero beat Javier Cruz and Elio del Solitario and Supremo Uno 2 stars, and main event saw Ultimate Dragon and Liz Mark and Atlantis beat Bestia Salvaje and Emilio Charles Jr. and Felino via countout 2.75 star. Match kind of dragged even though on paper it looked like a classic. Gandy had a CMLL middleweight title defense against Negro Casas on July 14 in Irapuato. El Satanico had an NWA light heavyweight title defense against Apollo Dantes on July 25 in Puebla. 2 new wrestlers headed in are the Big Bang, an American, and Alcon de Plata. That's all for this issue. See you after the break.